us to have for future. So thanks. Hope that's going to be okay with you. So thank you everyone for coming to our presentation hosted by Pollinator Project Rogue Valley, or PPRV. My name is Christina Lefevre, and it's great to see so many familiar faces and names. And I'd even like to take a second to recognize a couple of you who are here with us in Zoom land. Glad to see you, Pat Burnham, a PPRV board member, and I think Pete is here. Yep, Pete, I hope, and Wanda Borland, I know you're here. So thanks for helping us with so many of our PPRV things. And also glad to see you, Tula, of the Understory Initiative and the Rogue Native Plant Partnership. And also Sherry, thank you so much for joining us, Jackson County Master Gardeners. Perhaps at the end, Tula and Sherry, if we have some time, you might like to give a little update about some of the things that y'all are working on these days. So I'm very happy to invite all of you into this lovely conversation about something that is so critical to all of us. Something so tiny and not thought about a lot, but if we didn't have these, we would be in a world of hurt. Seriously. Yes, this is seriously seeds, their beauty, magic, and science with Arti Kirch. Thank you, Arti, very much for taking the time to prepare and then present this evening, and also for sharing your knowledge and enthusiasm with all of us at the Pollination Place in Phoenix. So PPRV's mission is to inspire and educate people about the importance of our native plants and how they support our native pollinators for our local ecosystems. The more we know about this critical relationship, the more we'll know how to save the bees and the butterflies and the rest of the planet. We want to help people see that beautiful connection and think about how they can help and get involved. And the beautiful, magical seed is a way. So now I'm going to introduce you to our tech guru, Perla, who's going to tell us about the Zoom presentation and then also get us started on our presentation for the next hour or so. Thank you, Perla, for being here and helping us with this presentation.
Thank you, Christina. Hi, everybody. My name's Perla. This will be a 30 to 40-minute presentation, so please be sure to type your questions on the chat down below, because I'll be keeping tabs on them. And then at the end, Arti will be able to answer them. Also, remember to mute your audio. And then Arti, next. Thank you. Okay, so this land acknowledgement, we at Pollinator Project Rogue Valley humbly acknowledge that we work and live upon the ancestral territory of the Shasta and Takelma tribes and other Native peoples. We are grateful to the elders and their people who cared for these lands in close connection to the earth and all beings here. We acknowledge that Native people still live here and deeply honor their sovereignty. We are thankful to be on these sacred lands with the plants and animals that inhabit them. I'm passing it over to Christina.
Great, thank you, Perla. So we're going to get to the presentation now, but first let me tell you just a little bit about my friend Arti Kirch, who's been volunteering with us now for about 6 months. Arti has been gardening for 20 years, following a passion built upon a lifetime love of nature, which is woven into all of her gardening decisions. She ran a native nonprofit nursery that specialized in plants for Mediterranean climates and also started a business growing and selling edible plants for summer gardens. Arti is a member of the Native Plant Society of Oregon, naturally, and her interest in seeds stems from plant propagation. I've heard that there are 2 types of plant propagators: those who like to start new plants from cuttings and those who like to start plants from seed. Not surprisingly, with their rich diversity of forms, shapes, and colors, and the pleasure of handling seeds, Arti definitely falls into the second category. Thank you, Arti, again for being here.
All right. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Perla. And thank you, everybody, for coming. It's a delight to be here. So are you ready for beauty? This isn't beautiful, but beauty, magic, and science? Great. Before we get started, just a couple of things. The Pollinator Project of Rogue Valley is about native plants, educating people, promoting their use in gardens, etc. In this presentation, you're going to see references to plants and seeds that aren't native. The reason for that is because sometimes it's a lot easier to relate to something that is familiar, a familiar seed or a familiar plant. And also, there's some pretty wonderful things to learn about the things that are common to us, and we think like, what's the big deal? It is a big deal. Second, you're going to hear the use of two-part scientific name. I'm doing this because I want to leave you with the information to positively identify afterwards the plants and seeds that we talk about. For example, on the next slide, we're going to see a big picture of seed from Cercocarpus betuloides. That's a mouthful, right? Well, its common name is mountain mahogany, but common names can be really confusing. Mountain mahogany isn't even a real mahogany. I mean, it doesn't even grow just on mountains. So to make things a little easier in this presentation, I will use common names frequently too, like mountain mahogany. But just for future reference, botanical names are much clearer once you learn them, and it's a lot less confusing, especially if you're talking to another plant person. And one other little caveat, this is the very first time I've ever done a presentation live online, so I'm a little nervous. So bear with me and just try to focus on the information and the pictures, which are beautiful, and not on any annoying facial gestures of my own. Okay, here we go. All right, what we have here on this slide are illustrations of that quote from one of the seminal figures in what became the environmental movement. Convince me that you have a seed there and I am prepared to expect wonders. Henry David Thoreau. I think you'll agree that all of these photos, they're beautiful. And their subject, though, is what gives the photographs their power. In addition, hidden in each of these photos are wonders that Thoreau came to expect. For example, in the upper right-hand photo, the large chestnutty-looking seeds are from the California buckeye tree. The pretty starbursts that are mixed in with them are milkweed seeds. California buckeye trees are, surprise, prevalent in California, but they also occur in Oregon, but only in Southwest Oregon, which makes our corner of the state pretty special if you didn't already think so. So California buckeye seeds are about the size of a child's fist. There's no known existing animal that will eat them. Plus, California buckeye seeds contain a toxin. So what gives? No animal wants to eat it. They're toxic. What's the deal? Well, it's hypothesized that the California buckeye seeds were eaten by now extinct megafauna, such as giant ground sloths. Those animals may have been able to stomach, and get a good meal to boot. They maybe have been able to stomach the seeds. Or take the seed in the big picture, which comes from the previously mentioned mountain mahogany. That fuzzy tail that you see is on the seed and is actually the stigma of the shrub's flower. It's attached to the seed. And in fact, if you look to the picture right to the right of it, you'll see the young seed with that tail just starting to come out. Well, the hairy tail helps the seed float away on the breeze. When the seed lands in the soil, that curly tail actually acts as like a mini drill and helps get the seed into the soil. Finally, all of those hairs on the little tail help prevent the seed from kind of working its way out. I mean, it's not a lock, it's not iron, but they do encourage the seed to stay put. By the way, if you ever see a mountain mahogany in full seed like this, and you can see them up in Forest Park, they're just, it's really dreamy looking. It almost looks like a finely woven veil has just drifted down gently onto the tree. And last but not least, on the slide, in the lower right corner, is the quirky seed pod of the balloon milk vetch. This plant can be found in the Cascades. I love holding the pods in my hands. They feel like little bladders. Not that I've actually held an animal bladder. I don't go around doing that, but I think this is what it must feel like. So anyways, are you getting an inkling of just what kind of beauty and magic is involved in a seed? So let's just review what we're going to be talking about in tonight's presentation. We're going to talk about why it's a good thing to learn about seeds. What's the role of a seed? How do seeds happen? What is a seed? You're going to be surprised. Where do seeds come from? Then seed forms and fruits and germination methods. And as Perla mentioned, we're going to take questions later on, and I don't doubt that there will be questions, so put them in the chat box. So I also want to emphasize before we go further, we are on a learning journey together. I don't know everything. Nobody does. And in addition, there's always new research and documentation coming forth that we all have to integrate and learn, and in some cases relearn. In my case, that has happened before. And by the way, if you see me handling notes, it's not because I don't know what I'm talking about, but if you let me, I'll just keep talking until cobwebs form on you, and we'll be here way past Halloween. So this keeps me on track. Anyways, by the way, in this slide, you will see the lovely Sara, Perla, who you've already met, and Laura. So if you want to have your, well, maybe 1.5 minutes of fame, come and volunteer with us, and you too can show up on a presentation in the future. All right, so why learn about seeds? Well, who cares, right? The seed. Well, there is a pragmatic reason to learn about it, and it's because it's the economy. Seeds create billions of dollars in trade, and of course, they're a key part of the global food web. They also support millions of jobs in harvesting, processing, shipping, distribution, and all the ancillary stuff that goes along with shipping food around, packaging, marketing, radio ads, you name it. Seeds are at the bottom of this. Think of seeds that you might encounter in your daily life, like coffee. So the coffee bean, which is just a common word, see how common words kind of trip you up. The coffee bean is really just the roasted seed of the coffee plant. By the way, there's 2 species of coffee plant out of the 120 that exist that actually find our way into our morning brews, our morning mugs. Coffea arabica is the good stuff that most of us drink every day. It's the bare minimum that you would expect from a place like Starbucks. On the other hand, Coffea canephora, or it's also known as robusta, that's almost always used for instant coffee. That's because it's quite a bit more bitter. Some even say it tastes a bit like burnt rubber. So enjoy your cup of Starbucks in a reusable cup. But the next time somebody says, have some Nescafe, you'll know at least you're getting a really good slug of caffeine along with that nice bitter taste. Another reason to learn about seeds, they are the vehicle for evolutionary change. It's pretty obvious to everyone by now that climate change is having huge impacts. Plants aren't exempt from this. They're suffering right along with us. But plants haven't been around for 500 million years. That's right, 500 million years without having learned a thing or two about how to survive. So external conditions, such as, like for human beings, radiation, but in the case of plants, could just be dryness. Those result in mutations that get encoded into the seed, and it helps then the plant's next generation survive perhaps a little bit better than the other one, which was used to other conditions. So if we want to keep having plants produce the food and oxygen we all need, then we are totally dependent on them performing their very ancient magic to produce seed that can handle these changed climatic conditions. Seeds, like the plants that produce them, are also potent little chemical factories. They produce compounds that have benefited our species for thousands of years. Remember that California buckeye seed that we looked at earlier, the one that was a snack for prehistoric ground sloths? Well, indigenous people figured out how to use those seeds to fill in the blank, to fish. Yeah. What they would do is they would create a little weir in a river that then formed a pool. The fish would find their way into that pool, into which the native people had put in buckeye seeds. Well, the water would leach out the toxin into this little pool. the fish would come along, they'd kind of get stupefied, and then it was like shooting fish in a barrel, except this is like picking fish out of a California buckeye-laden pool. A modern day example of how seeds benefit us and a compound that they contain is the oil that's processed from castor beans. If you've ever had that kind of problem, then you know that castor bean oil is a very efficient laxative. It's also used for anti-inflammatory purposes externally. And let me just say here about castor beans and all plants, do not under any circumstances attempt to use them experimentally. They can be lethal. And another example is that the castor bean is the source for the horribly potent nerve gas called ricin. Ricin, in fact, was the nerve gas that was used in an attack on the Japanese subway system, I think a couple decades ago. Many people died, and this stuff is, even in the smallest doses, is fatal. On a lighter note, though, seeds are also just beautiful. Many cultures through the ages have used seeds to create jewelry, like the one pictured in this photograph on this slide. This is a traditional Hawaiian lei, and it's made of kukui nuts. Now, I personally believe that these type of leis, or the jewelry that's made from any seed, came into use partly because they're just beautiful and they feel good. So for a more at-home example of something that you could do something with, right now, our gorgeous Oregon white oaks are casting off a huge crop of acorns. So if you, like I'm doing, I do this every fall. I always like to get a few of them and pick them up. And I like to rub them in my hands. I keep them in my pocket when I'm walking around, and they're smooth and they pick up our warmth. They feel good. It's almost like a kind of the original worry stone. It's very comforting. So when you're out next time walking around, don't disregard these. They're a miracle. All right. What's a seed for? What is its role? The simple answer is it's for life, right? Seeds, in the most elegant way possible, deliver the next generation of plants. And just like people, all seeds are individuals because they generally have come from unrelated parents. We'll talk about that parentage topic more later. As I mentioned in the previous slides, seeds are a vital food source. So that's one of their roles. For example, the bread you like, well, that was milled from wheat grain, and wheat is the seed of the wheat plant. The basmati rice that I have with a bunch of my dishes, yep, the rice is the seed from the rice plant. So it's not just us, though, that depend on the seed for some pretty staple foods. It's a bunch of our fellow creatures. It is bears and deer and birds and squirrels and on and on. Seeds are very heavy duty and nutritious food source. Another interesting but often overlooked role of seeds is their role in as shelter. So in this picture, I'm going to use my cursor. At the top here where my cursor is, if you can see it, if you can't see my cursor, there's a yellow blob there. And that's in the cut open seed head of a Grandelia nana, or an Idaho gumweed. It's the larva of a moth. So that larva, which started as an egg laid by its mom, spends the cold, wet part of our winter all snug and dry. Pretty sweet, huh? And it just also has, that's also nice, adjacent seeds to snack on. Whoops, sorry about that. It's a nice way to spend the winter if you can't get to Palm Springs. And I'm going to do a quick sidebar here on insects, which this isn't definitely just about seeds, but you're soon going to find out that seeds are related to everything, is related to everything else. Some of you might be grossed out when you see stuff like these larvae. I mean, they're kind of squishy and they're yellow and they're kind of gross and they don't have any eyes, you know, but do you like birds? If so, consider that insects in all their forms, but especially insects in their larval, or in the case of butterflies, caterpillar stage, are absolutely essential to young birds. Doug Tallamy is a professor of entomology at University of Delaware, and he's having quite a moment. And that's because he's done some research that's pretty mind-blowing. One of the most famous examples is he follows bird families. And an example of that is he has followed chickadee families. Well, the chickadees, believe it or not, even though they're common, have very specific nutritional needs for the parents and for the young birds. Now, the young birds, I should say, the ones that are in the nest, they have to have easily digestible protein. They hatch in 18 days. They triple or quadruple their size in 18 days. So you better have a lot of protein, something really nutritious to eat, and something that's easy to eat. Well, larvae, these like moth larvae or other insect larvae, are the perfect snack. They're filled with protein, with carbohydrates, with other anti-inflammatory compounds. And what's amazing is that his study revealed that on average, the parents deliver one caterpillar to the nest. It's typically 2 babies in a nest every 3 minutes, around the clock. This adds up to about 350 to 750 caterpillars every day. And over 18 days, that means 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars just to raise 2 little birds. And so where do these caterpillars come from? Here's a plug for Pollinator Project Rogue Valley. They come from native plants and native plant communities. Talamy observed the local native white oak, like our Oregon white oak, in one afternoon alone, and this wasn't the end of it, provided 233 caterpillars from 15 species of insects for the chickadees. Pretty cool. Hopefully that makes you think that larvae now are kind of pretty. Last, I want you to consider something that also is not thought of very often, is the role of seeds in the related sciences. For example, anthropologists have long tried to figure out when did human beings arrive in the Americas. Excuse me. And it was thought that we arrived here sometime at the end of the last ice age, which ended 10,000 years ago. Well, an analysis of fossilized footprints at the White Sands National Monument in New Mexico offers what some scientists say is the most conclusive evidence yet that human beings have been here in North America at least twice as long as was previously thought. The research published in the journal Science dates the prints to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. How do they know this? Well, the researchers determined it when the footprints that were made, they used radiocarbon dating to analyze the dried ditch grass seed that were above the footprint and below the footprint. So by this, which is a highly reliable source, they've essentially confirmed that we've been here a lot longer than we thought. Excuse me a minute. Not COVID, just talking too much. Okay. So, how do seeds happen? Essentially, it's pollination. Okay, you have birds and insects are attracted to flowers by color and scent. And the pollinators accidentally transfer pollen from the anther, which is the pollen producing part of the flower, and they transfer it accidentally to the stigma, or the pollen receiving part of the plant. So for example, on this slide, I'm going to use my cursor again, but if you don't see my cursor, in the picture in the lower right, you see all those red stems and then the yellow kind of fluffy balls on top of it. So there's the pollen. That's the pollen producing part of the plant. And then the one odd little structure sticking out of it, that's the pollen receiving part of the plant. And you'll notice that on that structure, which we'll get to some names later on, don't want to throw too much at you. You'll notice that there's a bunch of little pollen grains that are already stuck to it. So pollination on this particular plant is happening right before our eyes. So you might be wondering, okay, so pollination is basically it's sex, right? How did any of us get here? How did most of us get here? Well, it's sex. Yes, there are life forms that they can auto reproduce and they don't have to be bothered with the mess. But most of us got here the old-fashioned way. So in the plant world, the majority of reproduction is done also through sex. But instead of just, a pollen, kind of like the equivalent in the human beings of a sperm, and an egg, which has the exact equivalent in human beings, plants have a helper. They've got pollinators. And so just like in this picture on the slide where you see the bee, bees are a very well-known pollinator. So with their assistance, they are able to get, the plant is able to get the pollen transferred from the pollen producing part to the pollen receiving part. Now, as the various pollinators go from plant to plant, they carry along one or more grains of pollen. But I want you to know that there are other methods of pollination. For example, nearly all of our common conifers, our pines, our spruces, our firs, they rely on wind pollination. If you have bad allergies in pine, if you follow the allergen forecast, you can see this stuff just floating through the air. If you go into a conifer forest during pollination period, like me, you're weeping. So that strategy, instead of having the insect deliver the pollen directly to the pollen receiving part, their strategy is, let's spam the world. I'm just going to send out billions, trillions of pollens of grain pollens, and hopefully it'll land on some female cone and pollinate it. Another way that pollination can happen is through self-pollination. Literally, a plant can, it can connect. It can get its own pollen onto its own pollen receiving parts. In fact, many of our crops work that way. Wheat does that. Rice does that. Tomatoes do that. They can self-pollinate. Bees can, or other pollinators can also spread it, but you don't need them. All right. So you might be thinking, well, if plants can do it themselves, what possible benefit can there be to going through the trouble to wait for some insect to come along and make it happen? Well, like human beings, plants benefit from cross-pollination. The chances of which that increases the chances of when a pollen-laden insect comes from one plant and deposits accidentally, of course, pollen from another plant. So that flying insect has just helped diversify and strengthen that plant's genome. One limit to this, by the way, is that pollen must come from at least a minimum of the same genus of plants. So for example, a rose pollen from one variety of rose can potentially pollinate another variety of rose. But a daisy pollen, it's not gonna do anything for the rose. Now, the other thing is, as I mentioned before, is that instead of having to, the pines and the conifers, broadcast trillions of pollen grains, with pollinators, they can just go boop, boop, and they can just avoid that whole, I hope that my message in a bottle, my grains of pollen on the wind, I hope they land somewhere. The pollinator pretty much assures that the pollen is going to get to where it needs to go. And this method of pollination is so successful that it's been going on for 120 million years. Further, 90% of all plant species need pollination services. And so you might be asking, well, who does that? So we all know about, the birds do it, and some bats, like in the desert, will often are the pollinators for certain types of cacti. But the vast majority of pollinators are invertebrates. So it's our flies, it's our beetles, it's our wasps, it's our bees, it's our moths, it's all of them. They're really pulling the heavy load. And I think they're doing a pretty good job, right? And let me also then put in a good word here for another thing that the Pollinator Project Rogue Valley tries to promote, which is not to use insecticides, because the likelihood that you are going to kill something beneficial is almost a guarantee whenever you spray something. Yeah, you'll get the thing that's bugging you, but really think about it. You can buy another plant, and you're not raising food to feed yourself. You can go to the grocery store, thank goodness, and buy your own food. So if you convince yourself to just not use pesticides or use far fewer toxic forms of it. I can't get into that in this discussion, but definitely you can find information about that on the web. All right, so where do seeds come from? So the short answer is flowers. So although flowers are pleasing to us, they're not just window dressing. They're actually a technical masterpiece of centuries, of millions of years of engineering, and they're designed to do the right job of helping get that pollen to the right place. So sure, like in this picture, I'm going to use my cursor again. Here's the anthers. Okay, that's really nice, and there's the pollen, and you get it up there. Well, how are you going to make sure that the pollinator gets that move there? Well, so first of all, as we said before, flowers have all sorts of tricks to attract pollinators. One of the famous ones is scent. Scent can make a flower stand out in a crowded field. And of course, it works at night when maybe vision isn't so great. And of course, there are also nectaries or nectar producing organs in a flower. So the flower is engineered literally perfectly, literally measured perfectly, so that it essentially forces the pollinator into moving the pollen, from those anthers, which are right here. So let's say the bee comes in, squeezes down in there, brushes past to get to the nectaries, which this picture doesn't show the nectaries, but the nectaries are generally down here. It takes a sip of it, and it backs out, and as it backs out, whoops, it bumps into the stigma, which is the top part of the pollen the pollen receiver. So I want another sidebar. You might have noticed that these, so this is the top of the pollen receiving structure is called the stigma. And you might have noticed in some flowers like lilies, like Easter lilies, that it produces a kind of a fluid, a clear, if you touch it, it's even a little bit sticky. That's not nectar. That's actually a wholly different substance that the plant produces once the pollen lands here, it actually nourishes the pollen grain and then interacts chemically with the pollen to encourage it to essentially do its next job, which is, and follow my cursor, to travel down the style to get down here. And here's the money shot. So here's where the unfertilized eggs of the plant are. So once that pollen gets down here, fertilization happens. So I know this might be a little bit of science, but just hang in there just a little bit more. So let's back up a minute. What is a seed? So if we go to the previous slide, these aren't seeds yet because they're not fertilized. They are therefore called ovules. Sorry, you can impress your friends with that word next time you see them. Once the ovule is fertilized, it then becomes a seed. So a seed is a pollen fertilized ovule, and it contains the plant embryo. So, sorry a minute, let me just gather my thoughts here. So once the ovule is fertilized, it then becomes a fertilized seed. And notice what this says here in a second where my cursor is, mature seed. We're going to talk more about maturity versus mature seeds. And what's really cool though about the seed, and you may already know this, is that it's not just some blob of undifferentiated material. It actually is the baby plant. So I believe this is a peanut. It could be a peanut, but anyways, what I want you to look at on this picture is, so there's the seed coat, which encases the actual seed. It's part of the seed, but it's a seed coat, and let's make things easy. But you see this? The seed is born or develops the baby plant. It's got the baby root in there. It's got the baby stem. It's got even the baby leaves. So if you want to do an experiment, maybe you did this in 7th grade like I did and then totally forgot about it. But beans, which we're going to see very soon, are a really good way to do this. You can soak a bean overnight and then take off its seed coat the next day and just split it, lengthwise. And you're going to see a little tiny thing in there. That's the baby plant. So what I also wanted to just emphasize here is that in addition to having all these parts, which I hope you can see the analogy to human beings, when we're in the uterus and before we're born, we also have many of our parts. We've got heart and lungs and eyes and everything. So therefore, this is the analogy. The seed really has the same thing. It's got all the beginnings of a baby plant. However, when we are born, when we leave the uterus, and when a seed leaves the plant, other processes start to take place. So for example, after birth, human beings, we get taller, we get heavier, we grow hair in weird places. But this is all forecasted by our genetic and biological inheritance. Well, the same thing is true in the seeds, where they have everything that they need to begin life, but the things that they need later, they develop later. It's encoded in the genes, but they just develop it later. For example, like flowers, right? You don't need a flower to get started, but you do need a root, and you need a stem, and you need leaves. So your reward for listening to all of this is we are going to see a bean seed, do its thing. So I'm going to click on this, and you're going to just have to bear with me a little bit while YouTube takes its time coming up. And 1, 2, 3, let me full screen this. Okay, come on. Okay, here we go. So this is a bean seed. So it's already, remember in the slide beforehand, we saw that there was a baby root. Well, now the root, it's sensed. There's science behind that too, but it is sensed that it has a place to grow. It's got water and it's got a medium to grow in, which in this case is soil. So now it's sending out all those other root hairs. Now, boom, out comes the stem. Here come the first leaves. But again, this was all forecasted. That was in the seed. All that's happening now is that the seed is simply growing like we do after we're born. We don't just hang around being like a little baby our entire lives. We get bigger. By the way, this, as I mentioned before, or alluded to before, this is a bean. And if you remember the fairy tale about Jack and the Beanstalk, well, beans are just prodigious and vigorous growers. So they're really good to do experiments like this with, so you can see how quickly they grow. So you could do this at home, and I think somebody is going to know better than me, but I think you can get this going like in 2 or 3 days, maybe under a week, I think. Anyways, so there we go. There's the plant, but it was already in the darn seed to begin with. Okay. So, by the way, I was laughing to myself thinking that this is sort of like if you're of a certain age, on a really boring day, and everybody was restless in class, and then to like make you calm down, they brought out the audio visual equipment so that all the kids would calm down and basically do something, behave. All right, so on this slide, we're going to backtrack and go forward a little bit. So after the process of fertilization, the ovary, so if you remember that picture of that yellow flower and where the seeds were, that ovary, the ovary gets converted into a fruit. Now, fruit is a horticultural term. It's not going to be what you think it is. And the ovule, by the way, then is converted into the seed. Now, this is the audience participation part of our presentation. Along the bottom of your screen, locate the reactions feature, which is on the right side of that string of options. When I ask whether the object is a fruit or a seed, click on the reactions and choose the thumbs up if you agree. If you don't want to participate, that's totally cool. You can let the rest of us compete like in a mild version of the Hunger Games. Okay, here we go. So I have my cursor over the left-hand picture, and it is a strawberry. So is that a fruit? Don't say any thumbs. Well, yes, it's a fruit. But what's unusual about the strawberry, which is it's very uncommon in plants, is that the seeds of the plant, of the fruit, are on the outside. Almost all other fruits carry their seeds on the inside. Okay, our next picture to the right of the strawberry, that's from a maple tree. Is that a fruit? If you guessed fruit, you're right. That's because the product, the next generation product of a plant is always, in horticultural terms, referred to as a fruit. Now, in this maple seed, this maple structure, the seed is at the bottom. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, what we used to do is split them along the center and then stick them on our nose like they were horns. Yeah, we were pretty easily amused. Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to skip ahead because I think we're starting to run out of time. As usual, I thought I'm talking too much. So our last picture is an acorn. So fruit. If you guessed fruit, you were right. It just so happens that an acorn is a one-seeded fruit. Okay. I won't spend any more time on this because if that blew your mind, don't worry. It blew my mind the first time I heard it too. And in fact, here's another cool little thing. Did you know that in horticultural terms, a banana is actually a berry? I know, strange. Okay, next slide. Seed forms and distribution methods. Just like in the flower, everything about a plant is intentional. It's just not an accident. So for example, in the picture there of the coconut, which by the way is actually a seed and it's the largest seed in the world, the coconut, its form helps it be distributed because it wants to roll or float, just like that's how the Hawaiian Islands were colonized by coconut palms. They floated there. Another way that seeds can distribute themselves is with animals. The seed can stick to their fur, or an animal can eat it. And as it goes through their gut, then the acids in the animal's gut can help do what they call break the seed dormancy. They can help start to get that seed coat open so that the seed will germinate when it hits the ground. And it'll hit the ground with, how wonderful, a packet of fertilizer from the complements of the animal's gut. Seeds also fly. Again, in that first slide where we saw the buckeye seeds and we saw the little starbursts of milkweed seeds, well, you've seen them floating on the wind, just like you've seen cottonwood seeds float on the wind. Seeds can fly. But again, the plant knows what it's doing. It isn't an accident. This is very, very purposeful. So I'm hurrying a little bit because, it's impossible to really cover all the aspects of seeds. For example, you might have some questions like, well, how long do seeds last? And the answer is, well, that depends. In one fairly miraculous instance, scientists have germinated and they're growing 6 date palms from date seeds that were 2,000 years old. The date seeds were found, I believe, in an archaeological dig in the Judean desert. So those seeds lasted a long time. On the other hand, something like an acorn, to make a long story short, once it hits the ground, it's got to go. You can't hold on to it. Full of moisture, it'll either desiccate or it'll rot. So it doesn't have 2,000 years. However, seeds are so fascinating that you might want to take the next step and start to grow plants from seeds. If you do, the very first thing you need to do is always get fresh, viable seeds. Now, one note is that, everybody here, I probably don't have to say this to, but you all love plants, and I'm sure you love native plants. But if you're in the wild, my recommendation is to leave those seeds there for 2 main reasons. One, we really don't know how certain populations of plants, wild plants, how they respond to having seed collected by randomly, which is why the state generally requires a permit if you're going to collect seeds, so that they know and can follow the impact to a population of seed being collected from them. And another reason is that that seed might not be ready. It might look ready to you, but it's not ready. And that leads us to the next part here on the slide, which is that in order for seeds to do what that bean did, it has to do what horticulturists call it has to overcome its seed dormancy. Generally, water or something's got to penetrate that seed coat. So, for example, in the desert, desert seeds are waiting for the rain. And one of the ways that they kind of sense that rain is coming is that the wind will blow them. So they'll scoot along the desert surface, which is scratchy, and that will scratch the coat of the seed, and it will start to compromise that seed coat so that when the rain does come, the rain can penetrate, and then the race is on to get its roots down and its little leaves up. Overcoming seed dormancy can also be done with smoke and fire, as we well know. It can also be done with acid. Remember that seed going through an animal's gut? There's acid in that gut, and that helps again to overcome the seed dormancy. Sometimes just light will do it. So I want to end this presentation with some suggestions for further reading, because hopefully I've done something to make you go like, well, how does that work and how does that work? So I want to make one special recommendation. One of my favorite books is, and it's right here at the top on that slide, Making More Plants, The Science, Art, and Joy of Propagation by Ken Drews. And this is my copy here. And it's really easy to read. It's not, super sciencey, and it's filled with, beautiful photographs and lots of really easy to follow instructions. And there's some other really great resources that I've given that are really, they're my go-to resources. So that's it. This went really fast for me. So you've been beautified, you've been magicked, and you've been scienced. So now it's my turn. Thank you for coming, first of all. And Perla, without further ado, what do we got for questions?
We didn't get any questions. I think you answered them quite well during your presentation.
Okay, well, I guess I didn't tell you guys anything.
But if Christina would like to do our little closing. Wait, we have one question. We have one question. What are the best methods of seed storage?
In general, the best method is to store your seed until you're ready to plant it in a cool, especially dry place. So what I do with my seeds is don't store them in plastic, because if there's any moisture in the seed, it'll evaporate in there, and then you get mold, and then you'll probably kill your seeds. So I put mine in, like all of us get a ton of junk mail. So I just save those envelopes, not the ones with the plastic windows, but the ones that are just pure paper. I save those, I put my seeds in there. I write down the type of seed it is, when I collected it, and where I collected it. And I store that, well, for as long as the seed is viable, or until I plant it. Anything else?
Well, that'll just lead me to say that we will be sending an evaluation form out. So you'll have a chance to think about this along with getting the recording, and you can certainly put in any question that you have there. So yeah, we'll just wrap up with just a few more comments. First, very much thank you, Arti, for putting this together. I think it was really interesting and informative. Good to know about the castor beans, and thanks for taking us through the fruits versus the vegetables. I had put a video out that somebody had done about that exact same thing. It was very confusing. I had to watch it twice and I still couldn't get it. So I'll put that back out on the Facebook page of PPRV, try to do that tomorrow. It was very interesting. She was very fun about it. It was mind-boggling to think about that. So I think that I've learned some things, and I especially like about scratching the surface of a seed, because that's what I feel like we've done, right? You just scratch the surface of the seed, which is called
I know.
scarification. It's called scarification. So it's fall, and this is the best time to begin many of our native plants by seeds, either by putting them in pots or scattering them into our landscape, because the seeds of many native perennials need that long winter season, which is called stratification, before they can germinate. And I don't know if you all noticed the cute little slide there at the very end. That was Anna Castley and Laura Jessup. We were planting seeds last Halloween. So here we are a whole year later, and we're getting ready to do it again. A couple things, maybe just to tell you about some things that are coming up with PPRV. On our next slide, it shows that we're planning a presentation with Robin McKenzie, who's going to just continue our discussion here about native plants and pollinators. Some of you might remember that great class that Robin did back at the Talent Library back before COVID and Zoom and all that. So look for more information about that presentation soon. I'm excited to tell you that we're planning to increase our growing area at the Ashland Emergency Food Bank Garden. We already have a pollinator garden there, and we're going to put in another place to grow out native seeds this fall, we're hoping. And so some of you might like to help with that little project. And then we're working on putting our first From Fire to Flowers pollinator garden together. There we know someone in Medford who was impacted by the fire. And so we're gonna work on putting a garden there for her. And of course, we're always inviting volunteers to help with the different aspects of what we do, either in the gardens or in the office. So let us know about that. We're always appreciative of donations to help us maintain our office and our gardens, expand our educational efforts. So thank you for being here with us, joining us on this informative talk. I always enjoy hearing Arti talk. And yes, you're right, Arti, you could talk for a few more hours, I am sure.
Don't let me.
Exactly. So all of y'all look for a email that you should be getting it just soon, actually. And you can give us some feedback, ask some questions, and we'd love to get some suggestions and ideas for future presentations. Thank you, Perla, for hosting so graciously. We needed to have you there. So that's pretty much for our presentation. We're actually ending a little early. If anybody has some questions still in the chat, we have a little time. Also, I'd like to, Carolyn is saying, yes, we can do that, Carolyn. Share the reading list in the evaluation form. And we're also going to get a copy of this presentation. So you'll have this to go through again. So thank you, everyone. Go ahead. Yes.
Have you thought about where you are going to share the presentation and or just the reading list?
I'll go. When we get the link downloaded from Zoomland, when we get a recording, then I'll send that link out to everybody, and then the reading list will be in there. But we can pick that up and put it into the evaluation form as well, unless you can drop it into the chat right now. We didn't think about that before, so that's not a bad idea. But we'll get that for you. So yeah, that's pretty much our presentation. But I know we have Tula with the Understory Initiative and Rogue Native Plant Partnership, and also Sherry Morgan with the Jackson County Master Gardeners. And I know y'all in all your various hats have some things coming up. So let's see. Tula, do you want to go first? You're already unmuted, and you have your camera on, so go for it.
Hi, I apologize. My internet connection isn't great. So if I cut out, hopefully you can get the info from me somehow. But I work for the Understory Initiative, which is a local nonprofit, and we help to coordinate the Rogue Native Plant Partnership, which is essentially a meeting place for people who use native plants and who grow native plants and or have an interest in volunteering around native plants and seeds. And we have a lot of volunteer opportunities. Mostly in the spring and summer, we do wild collect seeds. We have the permits, and we have the professional ecologists who go out with us and help us find those ripe seeds growing out in the wild. And those are collected and used for restoration work around the Rogue Valley and beyond. You can sign up via our website for regular emails, and those will give you all the volunteer opportunities. And we actually also have some events coming up this fall where you can help us clean seed. And that is a really fun, relaxing activity involving screens and beautiful native seeds. And feel free to reach out to me for info on that. And I will put all of the links and things in the chat box right now.
Great. Thank you,
Thanks.
Tula. Y'all are doing good work. Appreciate it. Sherry, are you there? And would you like to tell us about something that's coming up like very soon? Let's see, where are you, Sherry? Okay, I'm going to unmute you if I can. Oh dear. Hello, Sherry. Okay, well, Sherry, please jump on when you can, but Sherry is so instrumental with the Jackson County Master Gardeners Association. And I know that we have the Winter Dreams Summer Gardens coming up starting November 6th. And I believe it's the 6th and the 7th and then the 13th as well, because in the virtual world we are in these days, instead of just one day, which it used to be in person, it would be one day. Now they're able to spread it out over 3 days. And so if you go to the Jackson County Master Gardeners website, you can get the agenda. And then I will be also talking there on the 13th, Saturday at, I think, 1:15 is my time, but you could do that. Sherry, are you there? Because I'm still not able to unmute you. So if you have anything else to say, I hope that was sufficient what I just shared. Let's see. So, oh, thank you, Tula, for that. So any other last parting questions? I can't believe we're actually ending on time. I really appreciate everybody's support. I just want to say it's really great to see so many volunteers on this call. And maybe I have a few moments to recognize everybody. I moved kind of quickly at the beginning, but Perla, of course, Deb Vroman is on here, Wanda Borland, couldn't do it without you. Pat Burnham, I mentioned you on our board, which is wonderful. Carrie Trantham, Kaya Cote, Paige has been one. Haven't seen you in a while, Paige. Pete Gonzalez, you're awesome. And so thank you everybody so much for your participation. Have a good evening and look for your evaluation form, and we'll see you the next time. And I hope you're inspired to plant a seed this fall.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Tula.